first joked about overtime had already been flagged for evidence tampering in an unrelated case, that the prosecutor's eagerness had exposed coordination that would now be examined, and that the judge's casual denial of rights would be reviewed by a judicial conduct board, because this wasn't revenge, it was accountability, as federal agents escorted stunned officers out. Not in cuffs yet, but under orders. The room felt smaller, chastened, and when Elias paused at the door, he looked back once. Not with anger, but with something colder and more instructive, saying that power does not announce itself with noise, that respect for the law is proven in how you treat the least powerful person in the room, and that the next time someone laughs because they think they know who a man is, they might want to remember this day, because justice has a habit of standing up when you least expect it. And when the doors closed behind him, the courthouse was left in silence, a silence heavier than laughter had ever been, because everyone understood the real verdict had never been about one man at all. It was about who they became when they thought no one who mattered was watching. End of chapter-tank. End of chapter 15. They laughed at him the moment he was let in, the sound sharp and casual like coins tossed on a table, the kind of laughter that came from men who believed the ending was already written, because the defendant wore a wrinkled gray suit borrowed from a public defender's closet, his wrists ringed with steel, his face calm in a way they mistook for fear or stupidity. And because he was black in a place where that fact alone often decided outcomes long before evidence ever spoke, the arresting. Officers leaned against the wall, whispering jokes about paperwork and overtime, one of them nudging another and saying this would be wrapped up before lunch, another muttering that the guy barely looked like he could run a corner store, let alone pull off the federal-level nonsense he was accused of, and even the bailiff smirked as the judge adjusted his glasses, unaware that every detail of the room, the cracked seal on the flag, the flickering fluorescent light, the outdated seal of the Department of Justice hanging crookedly, was being silently cataloged by the man in cuffs whose name on the docket read Elias Monroe, age 47, charged with obstruction, impersonation of a federal officer, and conspiracy to interfere with the Joint Task Force, a set of charges that sounded absurd enough to fuel the mockery. Because how could this quiet man with neatly trimmed hair and eyes that missed nothing be anything other than another pretender who flew too close to authority? The prosecutor laid it on thick, describing Elias as a fantasist who carried forged credentials and spoke convincingly enough to confuse local departments, claiming he had played FBI to intimidate people, and the cops snorted at that, because they had enjoyed slamming him against the hood the night before, enjoyed asking where his boss was now, enjoyed ignoring his single request for a phone call to Quantico, a word they repeated back to him in exaggerated accents, yet through it all, Elias never raised his voice, never corrected them, because patience had been trained into him across decades of rooms far more dangerous than this one, rooms where one wrong word meant lives lost, rooms where the loudest man was rarely the most powerful. As testimony rolled on, the defense barely objected, the public defender looking overwhelmed, and the judge began to glance at the clock. But then a twist crept in quietly when the prosecutor tried to introduce the seized badge as evidence, and the clerk hesitated, frowning at the serial number, because it didn't match any known counterfeit pattern. And when she read it aloud, the room shifted just a fraction, a tension like static crawling across skin, though the cops still laughed it off, one whispering that good fakes were easy to buy online, until Elias finally spoke, not to protest innocence, but to ask, politely, whether the court would allow a call to be placed before proceedings continued, a request denied at first, then begrudgingly granted when the clerk's confusion reached the judge's ears. The call was short, almost anticlimactic, Elias asking for a single person by name, using no titles, and when he hung up, he simply nodded as if confirming an appointment, and that was when the first real crack appeared. Because 10 minutes later, the courthouse doors opened, and men in dark suits walked in with a posture that bent the room around them. Credentials flashed too fast for casual eyes, and laughter died mid-breath as one of them approached the bench and whispered something that drained the color from the judge's face. The prosecutor stammered, the bailiff stiffened, and the cops along the wall straightened instinctively as the lead agent turned, not to the bench, not to the gallery, but to the man in cuffs, and said, with careful respect, "Director Monroe, we're ready when you are," a sentence that detonated silently, leaving behind ringing ears and open mouths, because the truth unspooled in pieces. Elias Monroe was not impersonating a federal officer. He was the recently appointed director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, operating under a sealed identity as part of an internal corruption probe that had reached into local departments, courthouses, and task forces. A probe that depended on people revealing who they were when they believed no one important was watching. The cuffs were removed with shaking hands, apologies spilling too late, and the judge tried to speak only to be stopped gently, firmly, as Elias stood and finally let the room see the full weight of his authority, explaining in a calm, devastating narrative how the laughter, the shortcuts, the assumptions, and the eagerness to humiliate had all been recorded, how body cams, call logs, and testimony had been cross-checked in real time, how the charges against him were never meant to stick but were designed to see how easily due process could be bent, and the final twist landed when he revealed that the man who first joked about overtime had already been